I've been living in a new country every month for the last 5 months, and this month was Japan. Today I'm going to talk about the things I enjoyed, the things I didn't, and what it means for the future of my travels. If you haven't been here before, I do one of these at the end of every month, so if that sounds of interest to you, consider subscribing. The people. Now, normally I don't talk about the people in most countries I visit unless there's something that just screams to me that they were amazing people, because I just don't want to stereotype or sound too biased, but the stereotype for Japanese people was just unbelievable. I mean, it just totally fits the bill. The people here are as friendly can be. I had so many people try to help me out, and people were offering me stuff, especially kind of the neighbors in the area. They were offering me all kinds of little gifts and that, trying to help me out with how to take out the garbage and how to do directions and all these different little things. The people here are stereotypically friendly, and the stereotype is so accurate, and it's really not a bad stereotype to have. So I definitely had to touch on the people here because I was just so impressed. Transportation. Transportation here in Japan was unbelievable. They do have a bit of a reputation for having this amazing transportation network, and it really didn't disappoint. I'm only about a 5-minute walk from a subway, and it takes about 10 minutes to get downtown, and I can get to just about anywhere I want to go using subways or trains. However, I do have to put an asterisk on it because the cost of intercity train rides was pretty outrageous. Like, to get from Osaka to Kyoto, which was about a 30-minute train ride or so, that ended up costing us about 1,200 yen per person each way. So for the two of us, that ended up costing us $50 just to go on a day trip. But you really can't complain about the metro or even the intercity trains because they're always running on time. They're super frequent. You don't have to check any schedules or anything like that. You just show up at a station, hop on the next train, because you never have to wait much more than about 5 minutes. The one other caveat that I didn't really love about the subways is that they did stop running at about midnight, which is a little earlier than some other cities. Cost of living. I always talk about cost of living in every country that I go to because it's such a critical part of travel, right? They had tons of free stuff to do. Going out to restaurants was super affordable. I already talked about, the subway, that was super affordable. Grocery prices were reasonable, but they weren't fantastic. Like, you could go out to, a local pub and get a couple small dishes that you could split for about maybe 1,500 yen at most at a local pub, or you could go to, say, the grocery store and get a meal for maybe $6 or 600 yen, I should say. Yeah, it's obviously cheaper to eat at home, but usually the price disparity in all the other countries we've been to is much more extreme. But overall, the cost of living here in Japan is really good, and it definitely helps that, the Canadian dollar, which is what I work off of, to the Japanese yen is really good right now. Japan has a bit of a reputation for being expensive, but I didn't find it expensive. Like, a lot of the costs are similar to any other first world country. So, the American feel. One thing that I really enjoyed here that I really didn't expect was how American it kind of felt. And I know that seems kind of ridiculous because Japan is vastly different than North America or most of Europe. But there was a lot of these little things that made it feel kind of American. Like, you would go out and you would see people going out for drinks after work and all kinds of teenagers hanging out with their friends after school. Like, it didn't feel like the culture was all that different. It was like, yeah, language and food and all that kind of stuff is different, but there was a lot of social norms that felt very similar to North America. And to give you a bit better of an example, do have a neighborhood here in Osaka called Amerikamura, which basically translates to Little America. And so they have lots of, American style restaurants and American clothing and all that. And you see a lot of people here dressed in jeans and a graphic tee and this American influence feel. Like, even the music and things like that were very American. Like, I did not hear any Japanese or even K-pop music. Like, all I really heard was American songs that I knew. So that was, really enjoyable because I didn't feel way too far from home. I still felt like I had a bit of a connection. The language. The language here was obviously Japanese, but if you've seen any of these previous videos of mine, I often talk about how a lot of places you go have way too much English. Like I've been to France, Germany, Albania, Croatia, and all of them there was a fair amount of English, and it didn't feel like my daily life was really hard enough. And you know, you shouldn't exactly hope for your daily life to be hard, but I kind of want that challenge. That's kind of part of the reason I travel. And here, there was not a lot of English, like almost zero. And it made it a lot of fun trying to communicate with some people, especially some people in my neighborhood who've been trying to communicate with me in small little ways. I like the idea that language is a little bit more complicated and I'm not just surrounded by English, you know. Meeting people. Meeting people here in Japan is actually extremely easy compared to a lot of the places we've been. But there's a couple reasons for that. One is that most of the places we've been before, we were in very small towns where you just don't get a ton of tourism. And then the other thing is that tourists kind of stick out here like a sore thumb. I mean, they hear you speak English, they know you're a foreigner. It was really enjoyable to be able to meet a lot of people. I've met more people in the last month here in Japan than I've met in all my previous travels. It was just so easy to find those other tourists that want to chat and want to have some fun. The food. So the last thing to talk about under the things I enjoyed is food, except there's a lot of caveats with the food here that I left it to the end of the good section here because there is some things about it that I really didn't enjoy. So to start off, Japanese food is fantastic. This country has the most Michelin stars in the world for a reason. They really understand good food. Chefs really care about their food. So to me, the food here was just such an experience. There was all kinds of different things like, you know, you had your ramen and sushi and all these different things that are just fantastic. But a major problem I really found here with going out to restaurants is that restaurants are very much separated based on the kind of food that they serve. And I don't mean by like nationality like you would see in North America where you get an Italian restaurant and a Japanese restaurant and a Mexican restaurant. No, it's much more like if you want sushi, you go to a sushi restaurant. If you want ramen, you go to a ramen bar. If you want skewers, you go to that kind of place. Like every single type of food had its own restaurant, which if I was a solo traveler, it wouldn't really bother me much. But it was a little bit difficult for both me and Jessica to go out and be like, okay, what do you feel like? We both got to decide on the exact same type of food that we want. The only exceptions to that was like the local pubs, like the izakayas, where you could get a bunch of small plates and we would share or just get some of our own. But we didn't always feel like that either because that's much more of like pub food. So that was a little bit tricky to handle. But overall, I love the food experience here. I love the food here. So I didn't want to put it under a negative section, but there was just so many little caveats as to why eating here became a little bit challenging at times. On to the bad. The rules-based system. Japanese people are sort of famous for how strict they are with all the rules. They have a lot of little cultural norms and rules that they follow that at times got a little bit exhausting. You just had to remember all these little things that you're supposed to do, whether you're out at a restaurant or you're trying to cross the street, or where you're supposed to eat your food, or, you know, what you're supposed to do on a train. Like there's all these things that, you know, Japanese people do in Japanese culture that I was just not used to, and I'm not used to such a rules-based society. So it was a little bit hard to adapt to. Now, I'm in their country, I'm gonna follow their rules. I strongly believe in that. I try to fit in as much as I can culturally. I try to not break any of the social norms and social rules, but yet at the same time, the more of them there are, the more exhausted I get. I found that very much in Germany, where they were a little bit more of a rules-based society, and it became a little bit tricky for me. The lack of nature. Another thing that was a big negative, and not a Japanese negative, but an Osaka negative, is that there was such little green space and nature nearby. Now, if you get out of the city and you get on one of those inner city trains, you can get out into nature within a fairly short amount of time, at least in terms of taking a train. It doesn't take that long to get into more of a, you know, a backcountry area. But in the city, it is a true concrete jungle. And, you know, I'm a city guy. I like cities. In fact, I love cities. But yet, I've never really been in a city that has such little nature as Osaka. There is not really a park to be found. There's not a lot of tree-lined streets. Like, there's just, It is just concrete and signs and roads, and that's all that there really is. And I never realized how much I enjoyed having a bit of a natural escape. And it was one thing that was a little bit hard to contend with here in Osaka, but that's not a Japan thing. Japan's known for some of its most amazing nature, but that was something that was a negative for my experience here in Osaka. And I feel like if you were in Tokyo, you would have a bit of a similar experience.
The bicycles.
One of the final negatives here that would be a little bit unexpected, not just to me, but anybody who hasn't been to Osaka, again, not a Japan thing, but the sheer amount of bicycles in this city is utterly mind-blowing and frustrating to deal with. I've been to somewhere like Amsterdam, which I think has the most bicycles in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong. There, everybody has a bicycle, but yet there is a designated bike lane, there's a certain etiquette. Here, people just ride bikes absolutely anywhere and everywhere. On the streets, on the sidewalk, down back alleys, and they just whip them around corners, and you're just always watching. It's like you're walking down the street, and if you want to cross to the other side of the sidewalk, not cross the street, but cross to the other side of the sidewalk, you basically have to do a blind spot check. You're looking behind you to make sure a bike's not going to hit you. Or when you walk around a corner, you sort of slow down and peek around the corner to make sure no bike's just going to come and cut you right off, which again, isn't a Japan thing. It's an Osaka thing. I know this is about Japan more as a whole, but to be honest, I don't have a lot of negatives about Japan, the country. It's an amazing country. So overall, as you can tell here, I don't really have a ton of negatives about this country. My review of this country is it's fantastic. I loved it in 2019 when I went to Tokyo. I loved it this time. It's a place I recommend basically everybody to go to.
The future.
So what does all this mean for the future of my travels? Well, overall, I don't think it really affects too much. I think we're now considering doing something more like rotating between 1 month in a bigger city, the next month being in a smaller town, because for the most part, the big city is really cool and enjoyable, but it does also get a little bit tiring and exhausting, and just having that space to breathe is also quite enjoyable. Another thing I'm definitely going to be doing starting next month is buying a lot more Western food for at home. It was hard and expensive to find Western food, but I'm just going to spend the money and do the extra time and effort to try to find that Western food, because I can't really cook good Asian food at home. And then on top of that, anytime we go out, you're having Asian food anyway. I'm not gonna cook it better than the cooks do here, so I might as well have Western food, have that little taste of home. One thing that I really learned here too, with dealing with such a small kitchen, I learned a lot about home cooking in general. And I think if we start getting to countries where it's cheap enough to eat out, we're gonna stop bothering with even having a Airbnb with a kitchen. And we've already planned some of that for some of our far off destinations into the future, because the prices will probably be cheap enough that we can just eat out every day. So as you can tell, a lot of what I've learned in this month is about eating at home and being at home. Again, home is kind of relative, but in general, that's all I've really learned here. Nothing too crazy. It was a great month, really enjoyed it. But that's it for today, guys. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking, subscribing, but until next time, we'll see ya.